Well, hi. It's here we are. We're live, and it's John the Animator guy. And today I have just some guy. He just happened to be looking out the window here, and just so hello's just some guy.
Hi, John. How is everybody doing out there?
It's going good. How are you handling it in wherever you are in terms of just being healthy and just get that update? And are you feeling good? Everybody's good.
Yeah, I'm in Chicago, so it's been really humid here the last few days. It's sort of calmed down today, so I don't have a massive headache. But we're still on lockdown. I haven't checked to see when they're planning to release us from this massive lockdown. I'm not excited to go back to my office, but I would like to be able to go to a grocery store and buy fruit, which I
Mm.
haven't been able to do. Um, so far so good. Nothing really terrible has happened in the city yet.
Mhm.
So I think we don't have the same sort of rates that you were seeing in New York or LA, but
Right.
we are locked down like them. Our mayor, on the other hand, is still going to get her hair done.
Okay. Geez. Okay. Well, we're I'm in Kentucky. I'm in Lexington, and we have kind of a Mister Rogers for a governor. He's been really supportive, and he's been handling things really well, we think. And you still can go. You could go to the grocery store. You wear your mask, do your social distancing, but again, Lexington is a small city, and you can do your social distancing, if you take care of things, and we've been good. So my wife and I we're in that state, that age group where we're the most vulnerable. So we make sure that we take care. But anyway, everybody's good. So good. Let's see. I see that we got some people on. Rocco, Rancid Potato, and Lidl Lee, and so we will get started on our conversation. And I'm thinking the best way we can do this is, let's talk about animation.
Okay.
Okay, what was the first thing that got you interested in animation? When did you know that it was something that you really enjoyed or wanted to be?
It was Beauty and the Beast, Disney's Beauty and the Beast. I was maybe that came out in 91.
Hmm.
And that was in the spring. I would have been 7 when that came out. And I was absolutely mystified by the animation. By that point, I kind of been sort of interested. I watched the Disney Channel, and they would show behind the scenes of how animation was made. I think I'd seen the there was like a making of How the Grinch Stole Christmas,
Hmm.
and they had talked about different like frames of there's 24 frames and a second of animation, and kind of broken it down that way. But it wasn't until Beauty and the Beast that I started to really pay attention, particularly the ending of that movie where the beast transforms back into a man. I was absolutely stunned by it. It reminded me of sculptures.
Hmm.
Um, and it turns out that years later, the animator Glenn Keane, he had actually gone to do that scene. He was having trouble. He couldn't really get it to work. So he asked if he could basically take a break, go abroad, and then work on it there. And Disney kind of said, sure. But, they kind of made it clear that if you don't have it done in 2 weeks, then don't come back.
Right.
So he goes to Europe and he studies Rodin's sculptures.
Hmm.
And then he draws this scene. So somehow at 7 years old, I was able to detect this fabulous artwork that this man was inspired by, and that just made me want to do this. And
Hmm.
so each successive Disney film pulled me in further. By the time I saw Aladdin, which was about a year later when it came out,
Hmm.
I had already seen the scene where he flies through the cave on the carpet because they
Right.
had shown it on Disney of how they were breaking it down and how this was the biggest thing that they had ever done with 3D animation and 2D animation. I had seen the entire thing. I knew everything about this movie. I was obsessed. So that was what got me in. And then when I went to see The Lion King, when Mufasa dies, everyone around me is like in tears, and I'm like, it's just drawings. It's just I have to do this. I have to have this power to
Hmm.
make people cry because it's such an emotional scene. And
Hmm.
it didn't have the effect on me then because I was about 11 or 12. But later on, when I saw the Iron Giant and the end of that movie, when he says Superman,
Hmm.
every time I instantly am on the verge of crying. Like
Mm.
it's perfectly done. So that was what pulled me in, and just the impressiveness of what you can do with lines on a page to get that kind of emotion and that kind of acting out of drawings, that you could get that kind of connection. I wanted to be able to do that.
Hmm. Okay. Well, I've got a similar story in terms of being very young. Again, I'm a child of the 50s, let's say. Okay. We had my dad bought we had one of the first TV sets in the neighborhood in Brooklyn. So I've always had a TV set, and to watch. And he showed me, and he made a big deal about putting me in front of the TV set. He said, "I want you to see this show, and it's Walt Disney." And that was the premiere of Disneyland and the Mouseketeers and all of that. So yeah, I grew up with that, and I remember doing a flip book. I'm maybe about this is 1954. I think Disneyland starts, or Disney. It's not even called the Wonderful World of Disney. It's Disneyland. I think it was called back then. But anyway, it was the first time, and so I was fascinated by drawing when a cousin of a distant cousin showed up and showed me how to draw Mickey Mouse, and I was probably 4 years old at the time.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, actually, the first film I ever went to in a theater was a reissue of Pinocchio, and I remember seeing this big guy with a mustache standing and waving his arms about, and I didn't quite understand what it was, but I know that I couldn't have been more than 4 years old, 4 or 5 years old, because everything was my dad had to explain to me what a theater was. It's a dark room that you go in, and there's a big picture, and it's all this. Oh, he went through that whole thing, but anyway, I did. I was fascinated by seeing how animation was described and explained through the Disney shows, and then also Walter Lantz and the Woody Woodpecker show, explaining the drawings and whatnot. So I did a little flip book of a dog walking, and I couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old, and I had my mom, take that stapled, flip book and send it to Disney. So that's what the power of doing that has always been, just part of me. So there you go. Those seeds are planted really early, and that's something there is a certain power in being able to create these characters, with a pencil and on a piece of paper, and and as you know, when you start realizing that you can do this, you also realize you have to have a little more patience than the average person to be able to do all those drawings, right?
Oh yeah, I learned my lesson when I was in college for my final project. We had it split across an entire year, basically 2 semesters.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever class you took the first semester, you had to take the following class.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody would be in the same class. And we had, I think it was a 2 minute long film that we would have to do. And my class was the first class to actually finish this project.
Mm-hmm.
No one had been able to finish it in like 20 years at Columbia College. Um, and I ended up doing all the storyboards.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had to do 2 10-second scenes out of the film.
Mm-hmm.
It was just nerve wracking trying to do all these drawings. And what actually destroyed me was trying to do the bubbles. The character's a frog, and he
Mm-hmm.
like dives, and then he swoops past the screen. And so as he swoops past, you got all the bubbles that have to go by,
Right.
but they're in perspective, and then
Mm-hmm.
they have to decrease
Yeah.
in a way that's natural. It doesn't look like they're all decreasing at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to like consciously keep track of like 30 bubbles, and I have no way of testing the animation because I couldn't go to the school. It's like an hour away from my home. So I'm here just flipping the pages, hoping
Right.
this better work, this better work. And then when I actually took it to get it scanned, everyone else was doing that for me because I had to help sort of fix the other stuff. So they're
Okay.
like, "Dude, you need to check your animation." I'm like, "Oh God, it's terrible." And it was like magnificent. I'm like, "Oh my God. Oh no." So I was really impressed by that. And when we showed the film, people were amazed by that scene. They actually oohed and awed at that scene. I'm like, "Wow, I didn't know you could actually do that." So
Well,
that's sort of the amazing part of that, but it does take a lot of time. I really didn't appreciate how long it takes to do it.
well, let me ask you this: the professors, the teachers that you had there, guiding you, they had explained to you about exposure sheets and things of that sort.
Yeah, so when I started, they gave us the old school X sheets, right? So they're
Right.
those massive, like
Mm-hmm.
11 by 17 pages,
Mm-hmm.
um, and we had to fill those out.
Yep.
But at the same time, the technology was improving. So there was this program that is now called Toon Boom Harmony, but at the
Yep.
time it was called US Animation.
Right.
And they had used it on the Powerpuff Girls movie that had
Mhm.
just come out about a year or so before I started. And one of the technical directors on that film, Ron Fleischer, had become a faculty member at Columbia College at that time. So he really pushed them to use this animation software. So as I'm learning to do it old school,
Mhm.
they're slowly transitioning into having everything scanned.
Yeah.
So I just missed having the absolute pain of having to use one of those old giant cameras with the glass pane and putting the pages down and clicking. They had us do it. And I'm like, I am never doing this again. This is it was it wasn't even like a full second of animation. It may have been like 12 frames for like a walk
Yeah.
cycle, and I am never do I couldn't keep track of that stuff in my head because it's like you gotta click 2 frames, lift it
Yeah.
up, pull it off, but then they were making sure that we would understand how to do multiple things on different pieces of paper because
Right.
every
Yeah.
element sort of separated.
Yes.
So then you gotta keep track of that, and I'm like, "Well, wait, did I do that?" And you can't go back. So it's like, I think I missed one. Oh, well,
Well,
because
listen, that was your standard operating procedure. I mean, that's why you had a camera assistant. I mean, there were always two people shooting for complex scenes, like where you've got multiple characters. But how many? Well, I mean, I shot Oxbury, so I know what that does. At the School of Visual Arts, it was like a 6 week, one night a week class that I took in when I was, what, 22, 23 years old, because I said I got to find out how to do this, and so I learned the technical aspects from an old, it was a Terry Toon and Fleischer animator who was doing the instruction, the teaching for that summer class. So yes, we learned how to shoot with bottom light and multiple planes, and just shooting through the through paper and what have you, and learning that you can only have so many levels before it starts getting very dark and you can't make out what's going on.
yeah, they told us about that. So I think they had 3 cameras. One was a multiplane,
Yeah.
so it was a larger one where you could actually have a scrolling background.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
the other 2 you could, but you couldn't have as large a field. So I think the
Right.
other one, it would only have maybe about 2 feet where you could sort of scroll it. The other one was like a real big one where it was almost like 4 feet for the background where you could really sort of move it around.
Hmm.
Um, but they were so time consuming and you had to be so specific. You
Hmm.
had to lock the door when you went in there so no one would accidentally open the door. So then they put locks on the
Oh,
on the door so that
the
they
light.
can't you can't unlock it from the outside. Someone actually has to have a key to get you
Right.
in. But when you're in, you can get out.
Oh yeah.
But if you close the door, that's it. You got to find somebody to get you back, to protect from the light. I'm like, I cannot keep track of all of this.
Well,
It's just so consuming.
well, here's the thing about learning animation old school. You learn how to do your scenes without needing pencil tests because so much of your material, like once you start learning timing. I remember, talking to the various animators when I cut my teeth on Tubby the Tuba, and that was at New York Institute of Technology. And was it Ed Catmull was a young graduate student doing work on computer animation, developing that on the other side of the campus.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I mean, this is 1974, 75. So I'm learning from Johnny Gentilella and Marty Taras, who are old Popeye and Mighty Mouse animators, how to do things, using exposure sheets and timing. And they would say timing is the last thing that comes to a young animator, the sense of timing, because you have to learn how something is going to feel as it goes across the screen. And you have to, at a certain point, it's like being a musician. Once you've learned the technical aspects of music, of what a sound and what a note, how long is it going to play, that's what happens with an animator, at least an old school animator, because you then can start playing without recording and then listening back to see if you did it okay or not. They're similar. There's a similar thing about that. So pencil tests were a luxury. Like even at Nelvana, where we did Rock and Rule, and we did
Hmm.
a whole bunch of other, like A Cosmic Christmas, Devil and Daniel Mouse, and a bunch of other shows. But back in the '70s, we had maybe a pencil test, every week or every 2 weeks.
Wow.
And so you're trying to remember, well, if you did something and you're trying to turn out, about 12 seconds a week or 15 seconds a week, and you're saying, well, I'll try this experiment, and you work on using the exposure sheets, and you say, okay, I tried this and that and that. You don't get any feedback for another week or two. So but you got to still keep on going.
Yeah.
So, but you do learn after a while. You start seeing on the screen how fast something is going across in as a beat. What's 6 frames, what's 12 frames, what's 8 frames, what's 4 frames. You can start learning, and you can say, okay, I know I got to take out 2 frames because it's going too fast, and I don't need to do 8. I don't have to pull out 4 frames out of that because they'll be, then they'll be too slow or what have you. So but a timing is something that, as I said, an animator learns from experience, and then you don't need to do too much of. You're doing finessing on an exposure sheet or after a pencil test. You don't have to say, I don't know if this is going to work or not. Uh,
Yeah, that was something that my teachers told me, that I had a pretty good sense of. My teachers were very young.
mhm,
Um, I had a guy who was a producer on Pete's Dragon.
mhm,
I had another guy that was Ron Fleischer. Another one was John Rohn, who is an absolute fantastic teacher. If there are any people who are going to go to Columbia College and you're going to take animation, if John is still teaching animation classes, take his classes.
mhm,
Him and his wife Marianne are like the best teachers I have ever had. Um, they know exactly how to give you the right kind of criticism. They tell
mhm,
you what's working and only what's working. So
mhm,
if they don't have anything to say, it's all terrible, right? Um, but they told me that I had a good sense of timing, and I think that's because what I would do when I would watch animation is once I learned about the concept of keyframes and breakdowns and in-betweens, I would try to watch the actual animation and see if I could pick out what were the keyframes.
mhm.
So I think playing video games also helped because I would play games like Street Fighter and Marvel versus Capcom, and these are very fast games, and I would turn the speed up on them like to very, very fast and play them on super hard mode so I'd be able to beat the game. And
Hmm.
so my reflexes became very, very quick. And I
Hmm.
started noticing patterns in the animation cycle for the game where
Hmm.
if you linked certain combos, it wouldn't let you cancel out. So you couldn't allow the animation to complete if you wanted to link to another combo. So I started to notice that. And I think when I started doing animation, that element was in my head. I also think, despite my dislike of the whole musical thing with animation, even though I'm super fans of all those really great Disney films, it does just kind of like everything doesn't have to be a musical, but
No.
things being timed to music actually helps you get a sense of timing because you can anticipate what happens in music. I think we're just naturally sort of in tune to that in a way that we aren't visually. So you know what's going to happen. And then when you're thinking about an action, you can go, how long does it take? Oh, that's too long a beat. That works for a song, but that character would just be standing there for too long to get to that beat. So I think that actually helped me when I started animating, where I could think, I know I need 12 frames here, but if I do this slow or this fast, it won't work. And then I started to sort of experiment of what if I just did 3 frames, but instead of putting them on 2 frames each, like one image for 2 frames, what if I just did 3 frames for this and
Hmm.
then went back to the every 2 frames and then see what would happen? And that experimentation sort of helped me develop an idea of the timing. I think my issue was just I didn't have any ability to look at the artwork at all until I got back to school because I couldn't scan it.
Well, flipping, you'll get an idea. See, that's the thing with animation. I remember Johnny Gent telling me. Now, Johnny Gent was the Popeye expert in at Paramount. He was the guy who developed the final model sheet that you see all the time of the from the 1940s of Popeye and Olive and what he was the best. He was the best animator in New York.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I learned from him how to throw a punch, the whole idea of flipping your drawing, just rolling, taking up a sheet of paper, a bunch of stuff like this here, like this. Well, let's see, yeah, and then yeah, and just
Yeah.
being able to do that. That is, he said, if you can flip it, you have something going for you. Now, then, when you do the exposure sheet, and you are using your well, if you use your exposure sheet like you would a composer composing a song, that's basically what it is
Yeah.
because basically there's theory of music and then theory of movement. I mean, you can figure out, okay, if I need if to develop something to accelerate, let's say just say basic acceleration, to look at very basic elements like a car getting starting. Well, it doesn't just automatically go from 0 to 60. There's still an increment. There's expansion.
Yeah.
There's an easing out from the stop into the speed. And then you come to a halt, and if you stop too fast, things are going to happen. I mean, if you understand that, then if you understand the theory of movement, of motion, then you can start crafting a silent piece without needing the pencil test, at least to get you going, because then you'll have a basic idea of how much is too much and how much is too slow. So
Yeah.
but a lot of people, if even back like 30 years ago, once the Lion Lamb video system came into play, where you could shoot video at 24 frames a second, single frame. And are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I think we had like the more recent versions of those. The
Mhm.
ones that we had at the school, they were smaller boxes. They
Yes,
were they were hooked up to
it's just a regular you know,
Yeah, it looked
a
like a
camcorder.
projector, like a small projector that the screen itself looked like a small projector just so you could have it backlit so you could see through the paper, and they had some like camcorder because that
Yep.
was what they had set up, a
Hmm.
camcorder, and you would run it in and could click off the frames. You could actually click them off one at a time and then
Right.
tell it to
Yep.
do it at 2 frames a second, which was it was amazing. It's like I
Right.
can just click and not have to double click.
Right.
We had those, and that I tried. Once I realized I couldn't get to the school that often, I did what you said was I would just flip it. I would sit here and animate. I'd put Lord of the Rings on in the background
Hmm.
and just have the movie playing, so I ended up being able to quote that movie, like, off the top of my head, and I would just flip the animation to see if it would work.
Right.
But there were people, like, once you could just go in and just slap this down real quick, there
Mhm.
were kids who were going in and just testing every single change, and it's like, "Don't do that. Just
No.
trust that you know what you're doing,"
Yeah.
you know?
Well, and that's a difference between someone who is, I mean, an animator understands how to play the pencil on paper because and playing with time, understanding that your drawing is really the manifestation of your analysis of where image is, or that figure is within movement within that time. You know, I mean, you have an overlapping action. You raise an arm. I mean, the earliest question that I've ever heard is, how many frames does it take to go from you raise your arm from from the side all the way up, to your hand? I said, well, it depends on how fast you want it to go.
Yeah.
So you want to punch somebody or what?
Well, what's interesting about that is that when I was in school, there was a transition that was happening in the industry of moving away from traditional hand-drawn animation
Hmm.
to computer animation. So I went to school from 2000 to 2004. By the time when I started, they were like, "Hey, you can go ahead and do traditional animation. They'll hire you for 3D stuff. You just show them your reel." And by the time I graduated, they're like, "No, son, you need to have like the 3D background." It had been that fast. But what was really interesting was the difference in the understanding of timing
Hmm.
from the 2D animators to the 3D animators. All the 2D students had a tendency to be slow, so they would add too many frames.
Hmm.
All the 3D animators had a tendency to be fast, and I think that's because they were relying on the computer to fill in the in-betweens for them rather than doing some of that themselves.
Right.
So their animation would be very stiff
Hmm.
because they were just moving these keyframes, but they weren't going in and finessing and cushioning any of the stuff in between it to
Right.
make it look more natural. Whereas the other side, the 2D side, they're just drawing as much as they could
Hmm.
because they were either trying to do it sort of with the breakdowns, but not understanding the timing and the pacing because
Hmm.
none of them acted it out. And
Hmm.
like, would you just do it? And then you have a sense of how long it takes.
Right.
Um, but they wouldn't do that. So they would draw all these pictures and then they would just film it and
Um,
wouldn't understand why it wasn't working.
well, what I would, I mean, the technical things are, you have your layout. Okay, let's just say you have something where you're given, a beginning, middle, and an end pose. And the director's given you, say, I want this to happen. This pose to be basically, this storytelling pose is the beginning. It's a hookup or to the previous scene, let's say, or is that's your start pose. Then you have your storytelling pose. What's the most that's happening, in the scene, and then you want to say, well, how does it end? So you're basically having a beginning, middle, and end pose. Well, between that, you have all this time, and it's your understanding of how you allocate that time to each one of those poses, and then you start using, like saying, okay, well, you have your exposure sheet. Well, if you don't have a soundtrack to guide you with, like, dialogue, you're going to have to start thinking for your own, and you're going to have to sort of playing out, use a stopwatch. I mean, that I would use that a lot, to say, okay, I want this to happen, and play around with things. And But when you're doing this, if you're writing music, you might start with with an idea, and you start playing. Well, composers do that all the time. They write it down. So you're thumbnailing. Composers are thumbnailing as they're running across a keyboard. Because basically, I like this note. I know this note. Okay, I like this combination here. Well, you do the same. You do the same thing with animation, but a limited amount of time that you have for that scene, and understanding how to make use of that time isn't something that if you don't have the technical capabilities, you don't have the camera access like you didn't. You got to rely on what's inside of you to be able to put that on paper.
Yeah. It was just a curious thing that I picked up with the other students. And I think part of, at least with me, one of the things that I did once I realized I could do this on my VHS machine, and then when I got a DVD player, it's way easier. Is you could go frame by frame.
Hmm.
So I had to keep in mind that for those who may not know, when you do traditional animation, it's 24 frames a second, but when it's transferred over to DVD, everything's 29.97 frames per second. So there's going to be extra frames, and when you're going through frame by frame, you'll catch it where you'll go and you'll click, and it's like that frame is held for 4 frames, or this one's held for 3. And it's like, why, what? And then sometimes they'll be like overlaid, they'll be sort of like
Hmm.
interlaced together.
Right.
So, you have to sort of factor that in. But what I would do is I would go and get fight scenes that I liked, like from Star Wars, Obi-Wan versus Darth Maul. I'm like, I'm gonna animate this. So
Hmm.
I got my paper and I went through and I took every hit that they did,
Yeah.
and then I have the time code, so I know exactly how long this
Right.
scene is.
Yeah.
So I just took my exposure sheets and sort of went through, and obviously they're not going to fall on perfect even numbers because
No.
it's the way that it's shot. So I just moved it around,
Hmm.
and then I just took that. I didn't do anything else. I just took that, and then I sat down and did the animation myself.
Hmm.
And I was stunned by, one, how dead on it was. But there's a moment in there where there's like a little push and pull between them, where Darth Maul pushes Obi-Wan back, and then Obi-Wan like pushes his blade away, and just getting the hits of all the contact points, I was able to get that movement. And then I could look at the animation and go, okay, it doesn't look as fluid as that. Why? And it's like, well, they're in motion, they're moving bodies. It works differently. If you draw it, you're going to have to exaggerate these poses. You might have to take out some frames, or you might have to really just go ahead and just make it a wilder movement than they actually did, so that when you come to that contact, it actually snaps. Because
Right.
it snaps when you're watching it for real, but when you're animating it, it just looks kind of boring.
Well, the thing about it is that you're not supposed to be doing live action. If you're animating, you have to go further,
Yeah,
because that's why you will note in some really, the earlier computer animation, everything seems to be floating.
yeah,
Because they don't understand weight. All of these characters, they have to, when you hit, when like say, the basic bouncing ball thing. Well, there is a moment in time when you reach the apex or the bottom of your bounce, or top of your arc. There is a fraction where it stops,
yeah,
and it doesn't just keep on going. It just stops, because then it has to go back the other. One goes up, then it goes down. I mean, but in an animation, unless you do that, if you make unless you have make a conscious effort to expose those drawings for that brief period of instead of doing it on ones, you do it on 2 frames, and then and you have the contact for 2 frames. That's what gives you the punch
yeah,
and the snap. So there's a lot of that has to. But if you don't understand that as as a basic theory of movement, then you're just relying on rotoscoping, on motion capture. You're not really doing it yourself.
That was something that when I was in school, I started to pick up, and I got really into Japanese animation around the same time,
Hmm.
and they have a different sort of aesthetic in the way that they animate.
Yeah.
But one of the things that they do very well is that kind of punchy, really fast motion.
Hmm.
And you can tell when the animators who are doing that understand that concept of you have to pause after the contact so
Hmm.
that it looks like it has impact. And when it doesn't happen, if you know what you're looking for, you'll know that it's off. But I've even had that with friends where they've watched certain shows and they're like, "There's something wrong about the fight scene. I don't understand why it's off. It doesn't look right."
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, they can catch that the contact's not happening,
Yeah.
even though they don't know anything about animation. They can
Well,
see that there's something wrong with it.
well, now there are different ways of approaching that, in the sense that, well, like Johnny Gent would tell me that, and he threw the best punch of any Popeye artist, and he said, "What you do is you show that, you tell them that you're about to punch, okay, and then you start moving towards, and then you go past the contact point, but you have
Yeah,
a reaction, and that's your pow." And there is no contact. You don't actually see the contact there on the
but
film.
the eye does it for you.
Yes.
And that's what people kind of miss. And I was trying to explain this to, I think it was one of my friends years ago when we were doing comic books.
Hmm.
And I was trying to explain to him that when you show 2 characters fighting, you don't actually have to show them punching each other, because that was
Hmm.
what he was doing. It was you were always seeing them, like, the actual contact is like it actually looks more powerful if the
Hmm.
arm goes past him, and then you have the little punch effect,
Hmm.
and then the other guy's head is, like, knocked back. It looks more impactful
Yeah.
because you're not seeing it. Your eye is actually gonna finish that for you, and this is a still image. When it's
Right.
drawn, it's like it's literally it's gonna you're gonna think you saw it,
Right.
even though you never saw it.
Right. Well, the only other way of doing it is, even, if you wanted to actually show that in animation, you could have that as a multiple image for one, for for a frame, and
Yeah,
use it as a, it's sort of like you have a 30% image here, but then the other image for in this double expose, that frame, and then you've also got that the sideways, so that it was pop like that, so you could feel it, because even
yeah.
when you look at live action, that's what happens with 30 frames a second. You see, or 60 frames a second. You see everything.
Yeah, and it looks really odd. I don't know,
Yeah.
did you see the Hobbit films in 3D?
No.
Okay, so when they did them in 3D, Peter Jackson, for
Oh,
whatever
yeah, yeah,
reason,
yeah, I saw those. Yes, yes. I'm sorry.
yeah,
Yes.
he decided to film them in at 60 frames per second.
Yeah.
So when you watch it in the traditional format at 24 frames a second, it looks perfectly fine.
Hmm.
But when you watch it in 3D, it first of all, it looks like you're on the set, so you can tell how fake everything is. It
Mm.
just completely exposes the filmmaking process.
Hmm.
But the other element is that it's so fast
Hmm.
that you can tell that they're not contacting each other when they're doing these fight scenes.
Right.
Whereas when I went right after that, the following show, and watched it in the traditional 24 frames, it looked like they were hitting.
Yeah.
It was something that was that simple that because it's real,
Hmm.
essentially, it looks real, you can tell the contact isn't happening.
Hmm.
It just broke the illusion completely.
Right. Well, and that's so. In terms of technology, I mean, like, how real do you have to be? I mean, if you're creating something that's art, well, let's use artistic license. Let's do. I mean, I don't mean, be silly about it, but why do we have to have this ultra realism when it's not, when you're talking about a fantasy? Now, I know that people want to be feel like they can feel the power and the energy, but you can do that without showing every pimple, you
Well,
know
I think for the live action stuff, which is it's a very weird thing. I remember there was some article that asked whether the Lion King remake, whether that was a live action animated film.
Hmm.
I'm like, Do you not understand the words you just said? There's no such thing. It's animated. There's no real animal shot in this movie. All the backgrounds are digital. They were taking of real pictures of real locations, but everything's been digitally composed. Nothing is real.
Yeah.
So it's not live action, it's just photorealistic. But there's a point where it doesn't work. The
Mhm.
lions don't have expressive faces the way that
No.
humans do, and you couldn't get away with it. So these scenes that had power in the original film suddenly were lacking because you couldn't get the lions to emote the way
Right.
that you could in the hand-drawn stuff. So if they just made them look more cartoony, but then kept that photorealism like they did with Sonic the Hedgehog and with the Pokemon movie,
Right.
it would have worked. But by not doing that, it just doesn't work.
Well, people once again, I don't. People think that if it doesn't look realistic, if it's a cartoon, it's kiddie stuff.
Yeah,
And why?
because we've all grown up with animation basically being either for kids or for the family. And the only animation that's outside of that, at least in the States, are adult comedies like Family Guy and The Simpsons and South Park. But you go over to Europe, you go over to Japan, and they have adult shows like Cowboy Bebop is a really great one. My aunt started watching that. She just stumbled onto it one day on Cartoon Network and she got hooked, and it's this very adult themed show. It's not for little kids, but it's all animated. And
Right.
you have shows like that are for kids, like Mobile Suit Gundam. This is pretty much a kid's show, but
Hmm.
it's about war.
Hmm.
And you have these really great themes where you're having main characters get killed. The guy who created it, his name is was it Yoshiyuki Tomino? He's called Kill 'Em All Tomino in Japan because he would just wipe out his entire cast, right? And it's just astounding that he would do that. And like the cast,
Hmm.
half of the cast are like teenagers. So he would just and he would do it with no hesitations, like, oh, we're going on this happy little thing. Boom, that one's dead. And then it would just be in the middle of the season, like 14 episodes, half the cast dies, right? And they die in these very tragic but kind of almost pointless ways in the way that people actually do die in real conflicts.
Hmm.
And that was sort of the point of what he was doing.
Hmm.
So him taking this animation and taking his frustration from what happened in World War II because he grew up during that time
Right.
and taking his animus towards the United States, which he said he came to Colombia and he did an interview, and it was funny. The translators did not want to translate what he was saying, but I know enough Japanese to know when I'm being insulted, and he
No.
was insulting the crap out of us, and it was absolutely hilarious watching these guys try not to say what he was saying.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but he was basically saying, like, we just wanted to show the Americans that we could do better animation than you. And your stupid Disney stuff, we're going to outdo you and we're going to make it serious. And so that's what he did. And it resulted in a very um, interesting type of show that has now, it's been around for about 30, 40 years.
Hmm.
We don't have anything like that in the States where you have something that is mature to a certain degree. It's just not here.
Well, I'm reposting this here from Daniel C. And he's talking, he's asking us question, and it seems to fit into what we're saying. Is there a future for 2D animation here in the States?
Uh, who's doing it? I mean, as far as I know, everybody's more or less done. Warner Brothers is doing some stuff, but a lot of that is farmed out overseas.
Hmm.
Um, DreamWorks quit after Sinbad.
Hmm.
Disney pretty much only does it for like their TV shows. They won't do any more features at all, no matter how much the new guard are complaining about it. They think that it doesn't sell because the last few films bombed.
Well, but the thing is that okay, and they complained that their pencils were responsible for their failure. I'm just going to say that because story sucked. What they used was terrible. and so they didn't. They decided to create. I mean, they had a period of time where things were going quite well, but I don't think anybody for doing animation understands storytelling. That's a blanket statement, but how else can I? How can I? How else can I judge it? Because basically, I mean, half the things that you have on motion pictures are animated, but they're animated with CGI.
Yeah. Well, I think when it comes at least to Disney, what happened with them was they got into that little Disney renaissance
Hmm.
with The Little Mermaid
Hmm.
really, popping it off. They had a downturn with Rescuers Down Under following that, but then they got back with Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Lion King. Pocahontas came out and it did well, but
Hmm.
it wasn't received well. And
Right.
then I think it was followed by Hercules, The Hunchback of Notre
Yeah.
Dame, and all of those did okay, but I think people were getting tired of the musical thing that had sort of been they had
Yeah.
been doing. And
Yeah.
so
Well,
when they tried to branch out of that with what was the name of that one? Atlantis, it just bombed. Like no one liked it. It wasn't because it was bad. It was that it was so different than what they had previously done that people weren't willing to give it an option. And so after that, they were like, "Oh well, whatever. We'll go back to what we were doing."
but they also did what they destroyed was their studio. I mean, yeah, just you
They
they
fired everybody, didn't they?
pardon?
They fired everybody, didn't they?
Yeah.
Like they
Oh
like
yeah.
closed it down. Yeah.
Oh yeah. They closed down everything at about 2002, 2003. You
Yeah,
know.
that was after Home on the Range.
Yeah.
I remember that tested so poorly that they had to reanimate sections of it because the kids hated the main character.
Hmm.
So they were like, "What do we do?" We have the film mostly done. They couldn't completely redo it. The kids didn't like the art style, they didn't like the story, and they liked every character but the main character who's like in 80% of the film. So they were just sort
Yeah.
of stuck. And after that, they were like, "All right, we're done."
But you know what? They could have kept the studio going by just doing $20 million, $30 million. Pare it down. Don't. I mean, I remember when it's a technology of just layering upon layering upon layering of stuff. Concentrate on the story. If you make a $30 million budget, you don't have to make $500 million to break even.
Yeah, well, that's true. And I know that with the technology that they were trying to include, um, they created deep canvas for
Mhm.
Tarzan,
Yeah.
which allowed them to create these lush forest backgrounds and jungle backgrounds without actually having to draw them all, because that would just be too time consuming.
Right.
But they were moving more towards having this 2D animation on top of 3D backgrounds. And I think they used deep canvas again for Treasure Planet to create the background. So if you watch the movie, you'll see their sections where they're going through like the innards of the ship and you see
Hmm.
all this piping and everything. That is all digital. And it's been designed to look like it's hand drawn,
Hmm.
but it's all digital and it's so convincing that until they start moving the camera, you can't tell that it's computer generated. And
Right.
I'm looking and it's really, really convincing. So I think that was part of it. But if I remember right, using deep canvas was one of the things that made that movie so expensive.
Hmm.
Was the technology was just insane, and
Hmm.
they didn't have the budget for it. But also the story of Treasure Planet is supposed to be a take on Treasure Island.
Yeah.
The art design for it is absolutely fantastic. Um, but they just didn't have the right story, and it came out this weird time. I think if it came out a year later, it would have worked because it came out in 2002, and
Hmm.
that was around the time that Linkin Park was really popular. Like, if you
Yeah.
watch the movie, just put on a Linkin Park album. It works. Like, it shouldn't work, but it works. So if they had just waited until 2003, like right in the middle of The Matrix Reloaded and Kill Bill Volume 2, like in the middle of that summer,
Hmm.
and dropped that movie and then tied in Linkin Park stuff with that, this movie would have been fantastic. They had the wrong music. The story was okay, I mean,
Hmm.
Treasure Island isn't the most engaging story, and they didn't sort of amp it up. They didn't ratchet it up, and some of the characters were too similar to previous characters, so
Yeah.
they just didn't do it. And then DreamWorks, they had a hit with Prince of Egypt. That was a fantastic movie. The follow-up that went to theaters was the horse movie,
Oh yeah,
Spirited.
Spirit.
Yeah, yeah, which nobody understood. So
Yeah.
that, and then they did Sinbad, and they just didn't market Sinbad at all.
Hmm.
So it's the weirdest thing where they kind of let it fail
Yeah.
instead of trying to boost it. And I think John Lasseter even said that he thought the success of the Pixar movies killed the 2D animation, and there was he didn't want that to happen. That wasn't what his goal was. That he
Well,
thought they could be, that 2D animation and 3D animation could be live side by side.
yeah.
But the success of the Pixar movies, John Lasseter said that he thought that is what killed the 2D movie, is that people wanted to see these 3D movies, and they weren't interested anymore in the 2D films. But they are willing to go and see stop motion films. Those have done pretty well,
Yeah.
like The Corpse's Bride.
Hmm.
So it's weird how, because it looks, I think people may think it's 3D animation, to be perfectly honest.
Hmm.
Uh, but it's interesting that that would work. But if you do something like Princess and the Frog, they're like, nah, I don't want to see that.
Yeah, well, I think I'm interested and curious to see what the response has been to Klaus. The Spa. The Klaus movie that's in Netflix. The Sergio, what's his name? He was an animator at Disney's, and he went back to Spain and had his own. He did Despicable Me.
Okay.
And if you look up Netflix, that it was their one of their Christmas movies,
Is
and
it's traditionally drawn?
traditionally drawn, but they made it look like it was 3D, CGI.
Okay.
They added all these shadows and the technology and whatnot. I don't know what their budget was on that, but they had to have. I mean, it's really hard to find 2D animators today. You
Yeah,
know,
it's very peculiar, and the technology has never been better or more accessible.
right?
Toon Boom Studio, Toon Boom Harmony, you can get for about $60 a month and get professional grade animation software. You can run it off a basic computer,
Yeah.
and you can basically do everything yourself. If you have a tablet, you can draw directly into the software and do everything yourself. So it's never been easier, and yet no one's really willing to do anything outside of stuff like, American Dad and Bob's Burger.
Well, that's because today's 2D is really puppetry.
Yeah,
You know,
that's another thing that has just upset me so much when I saw, because the advertisement for the newest version of Toon Boom Harmony was emphasizing these assets that you can create, where it's just cutout animation. It's like
yeah,
I want to draw. I don't want to do cutout animation.
right. Well, that's that, and that's what it is. Um, so I myself, I mean, to me, I don't know where people who want to draw go to other than do your own projects for whatever the love of it that you can, because I don't know how people make a living a living today doing this. You
It's
know.
shipped out overseas for the most part. I know there's an artist, LaShawn Thomas, who he had his own comic books, and he ended up getting involved in the Boondocks cartoon when
Hmm.
that was made. I think he was friends with Aaron Magruder, and they ended up sort of having him do the character designs,
Hmm.
and he would do storyboards. And what
Right.
would happen is he would do the storyboards, and they send them over to South Korea,
Hmm.
and they scrap his storyboards. They redo everything themselves.
Yeah.
So he decided, okay, I'll just move to Seoul so I can live there and then work on the production there. That way they'll use what I do, which is exactly what he did. And he ended up going from there to, I think, Black Dynamite. He worked on Thundercats show, I believe. He did a bunch of
Mm.
storyboarding for different places, but that was the only way he could ensure they were using his stuff.
But he had to
Otherwise,
supervise
just
them.
scrap it. Yeah.
Yeah, because basically it's all piecework. You can't do anything. You can't make a living doing quality work.
Now, is that because they just don't want to pay people? Because
Yeah.
that's
Oh
my
yeah.
assumption.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, um, easily the let's go back to the days. I mean, they've been outsourcing since the mid 70s. I was when I was at Patty Freeling, um, working on Baggy Pants and the Nitwits and the Mr. Magoo shows. Um, we were doing. They were sending the assistant work, and all the drawing was done in California in studio, and it was being shipped. Ink and paint, was being sent overseas. So
Wow.
and that was that. Um, Wang Animation Studios was one of the biggest companies producing material, overseas material, for Disney and for Hanna Barbera and whatnot. Jimmy Wang was one of my in betweeners on the Raggedy Ann and Andy. But because he was Japanese and he went back home, he was able to pull together work through Bill Hanna and Barbera and Joe Barbera, and they started. It became more and more stuff kept come from just funneling through that. It is the producers, is the people who don't want to spend any money whatsoever for things that are produced here. And
Yeah.
they go to we've gone from a country that manufactures things that people want to being jobs where they're just serving people who have more money than we do. I mean, basically, that's what it boils down. That's what a service economy is. You
Yeah,
know.
I was always stunned by that. I knew that was happening because when I was a little kid, I would notice, at the end of the shows, all these names or names that I couldn't pronounce.
Mm-hmm.
Now I can because I know how to pronounce Japanese.
All right.
But it's just like I don't know who any of these people are. And then over the years, it started to go from Japan to South Korea. And now even Japan is doing that. So
Mm-hmm.
when you watch different anime shows,
Yeah.
if you look at the credits, all of a sudden the names will go from kanji and hiragana and katakana to English, and
Mm-hmm.
they're all three names. It's like, yeah, they're shipping all their animation over to South Korea, so they don't want to pay their animators, and they're
Right.
working these guys to death.
Yeah, I know that's the problem. I mean, but you see, what happened is that the shipping things out is and making it dumbing down the technical uh, needs, the talent, is a way of not having to pay people anything.
Yeah,
Look. I mean, you look at animation today. They'll you could go on LinkedIn and you could ask, well, let's see now. We want to budget this amount of. We want. How much would it take to do a 1 minute commercial, a 1 minute thing? And they'll give you like, I'll give you. We got a budget of $500 to do 1 minute.
yeah,
I
yeah. That's
mean,
not gonna happen.
come on, that's half a second. You know,
Yeah,
I mean, years ago, you would be paid, it would be, $150 a foot of rough animation. That's 16 frames. That's
yeah,
$10 a frame, and that's just for the rough animation.
yeah. I
So,
learned I learned my lesson doing that. I
yeah.
did. Now that was I was aware of it, and thankfully the teachers at Columbia were willing to tell people, this is how much your work is worth.
Hmm.
Don't go under a certain amount because
Yeah.
you're and once you and I think the other thing too is that is one thing that I learned from freelancing is that I learned how long it took me to do something.
Hmm.
And so once I understood how much the industry standard was,
Hmm.
it's like I'm not going to sit here, I would have people go, "I want you to draw a comic for me." and
Hmm.
they want to pay me like $100 for the
Yeah.
22 pages. I'm like, I'm spending 8 hours a page, and you're
Hmm.
going to pay me $200? So
Hmm.
it's going to take me a whole month to draw this thing, and I'm going to get $200. That's ridiculous, you know?
Uh,
So it's the same thing with animation. I didn't realize how bad it was until I had to find a job.
mhm. Well, back then, you're talking about in the mid 19 say in the 1990s. Okay, it was standard, for let's say the union was for a journeyman basic union 40-hour a week was about $1,400 a week that you'd get.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you know, a star an apprentice uh, um, animator would maybe like someone who was just like the first 12 the first 3 months or 6 months you'd be making about $1,100, and then a journeyman would make about 1,400 12 to 1,400 dollars. The An assistant animator, depending upon how good it was, the base was about 10 1,000 to $1,100. This is 1990, so we're talking 20 years, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, so but then what happened is that the studios started ramping up, and I apologize to everybody who's teaching, but they flooded the market with schools, because up until that time it was only Cal Arts and Sheridan that were actually doing all of the high quality students coming out the teaching. But then they started pumping money into schools, so that you have all these animation programs going on, and they flooded the market with new talent, and especially aiming at computers generated. It's all. I mean, I'll be quite honest. It was cynical on their part, but that's the way they can control costs.
Well, even then though, like even with the computer animation,
Yeah.
they're exporting that. And
Oh
so
yeah. Yeah.
that's the part that just blew my mind. Is like, why are you exporting it's the computer.
Yeah.
Like literally the person doing the keyframing,
Yeah.
that's literally their job.
Yeah.
There's they You're doing this one scene. Everybody has the same model.
Hmm.
So the only thing that'll be off is that maybe one person animates a little differently than the other, but you're all using the same model, so that's already been done.
Hmm.
So you're gonna give this to this guy or this gal. She's gonna sit here and time it out, right? The computer's going to do the rest of the work. She might have to go in and tweak a few things, but
Hmm.
otherwise, the computer is literally going to do the work for her, and you're farming that out. Like, I don't understand why you won't pay the people. So you then got people to go and get degrees to spend 4 years in school, and they can't get a job. And then you have people who didn't go to school, but who bought the software or pirated the software and developed these reels. They still can't get a job because you're living in the States and nobody wants to pay you. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. How do you have a thriving industry if you're farming everything out?
Well, they're doing they do storyboarding. They do scripts and storyboards, but they're creating a way of doing the story. But the amount of work that you have to do as a storyboard artist today is what it was like doing not just your storyboards, which are the beats of what's supposed to be happening. They're having you do layouts. They're having you do redesigns of characters. They're having you do cutting all the scenes. They're putting in laying down the dialogue. They're making you do everything. Do the editing, layout, and some other thing, and putting it together so that the director can see whether or not they're what they've given you instructions for are or what they want, and then they'll make or they'll be able to play around with it. But you're literally doing everything now. One person would have been three jobs.
Yeah, and then you're not only not getting paid for it, but there's a very real possibility that the real person who's going to do it is going to scrap all the work you did.
I don't know. I mean,
If
it's
it
been so
depends on
long.
where they ship it, you know.
It's been so long since I've done that. Basically, it's. I mean, I've seen it, I've done it, and it's. I would only do it for myself. I can't. I know it's easy to talk for me because I'm retired. I mean, I'm not I'm not in the workforce. I'm just going to do my own stuff. But what this is what I see, and it's kind of like that's a difference to me between today and in the past. I mean, it's always been a factory kind of environment. I mean, it could be a clean factory. I mean, the DreamWorks was an incredible place in the beginning, free lunches for everybody. Or Disney's would do. I mean, when after Snow White, had made all that money, and they made the new studio. Disney did. I mean, they had all kinds of things, all kinds of perks there. But once once you reach a certain point, I mean, there's no more of that. And so now you don't used to be able to say, I know whose animation that style is. I know who drew animated that because I know how they would turn and twist a character, or they would land a punch, or they had a certain way of tilting the heads, or there was a certain way of sparking the eyes. Today you can't do that because no one knows who did that work, because you don't have that artistic difference, and you don't
Yeah.
have any stars.
Well, it does happen still in Japan. I follow a bunch of the studios. I can look at a piece of animation. I may not be able to pick out the exact animator, but I can know what studio they're from
Oh yeah,
almost
yeah,
instantly
yeah.
because they have those distinct elements.
Hmm.
My favorite studio is Bones. They do
Hmm.
fantastic work, and they have very good choreography with their fight scenes. They have very good animators who have
Hmm.
excellent senses of timing.
Hmm.
The quality of animation, even when they're on a limited budget, tends to be pretty good. They know where to spend their money, basically. So when you watch it, you say, "Oh, they're skimping here." There's
Hmm.
gonna be something crazy that happens like 2 episodes later, and then they do it, and it's this spectacular. You know, everything is animated. The background is hand drawn, and there is all animated just for this one little scene of this character running, and it looks completely awesome, and you know exactly how they did it, and you also don't know how they did it
Yeah,
because it's that good.
yeah.
Um, but we don't do that here. And
No.
a lot of the animation that we see is so controlled by this idea of making these assets that you can sort of plug and pop into different scenes that when you do start to see some of the animation, like the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle show, there's actually fluid animation in it. I don't like the art design, but the animation quality is actually pretty good.
Hmm.
But that's rare. They don't do that often anymore. They were doing it with Avatar: Last Airbender because they kind of had to because of the nature of the show.
Hmm.
But there's a limitation in a lot of the shows,
Hmm.
especially from like Cartoon Network.
Yeah.
Um, they sort of inherited that Hanna-Barbera limited animation style.
Well,
And
it's still a planned thing. I mean, animation is still. I mean, everything has to be planned. I mean, you can say I only have so much money to work with it, and so that's always a thing of the limitations can create interesting solutions.
yeah,
You Um,
but I think that they're not doing it. And
no.
part of it may be just because there's no one working in the industry now, or at least not a lot, who have that older knowledge. So who would tell them to do it anyway? Nobody knows because that information is lost. And that's the risk is like you have the benefit of being taught by all these people who pioneered animation. By the time I got to school, if I didn't get the illusion of art,
Right.
uh, or the art of illusion, um, there was no way of learning it. Most of those folks, they were unfortunately passing away.
Right.
So a lot of these guys who pioneered animation, the opportunity to learn from them was gone. But then we had that second generation that you belong to, and guys like Glenn Keane and Andreas Deja, they belong to, who pioneered this next level of animation. They were taught by these people and they could pass it on. But
Mhm.
now, those they're, if you don't go to Cal Arts, you're not going to be taught by them. And a lot of the animators who would teach that, they're trying to teach this to people who are doing 3D animation who are, unfortunately, they're not being taught to do something like, oh, you're going to make King Kong. It's like, no, you're going to animate this branch. You
Right.
know, that's gonna be your job. If you're lucky and you get into video game design, you might get to do some character animation, but for the most part, you're just gonna be doing digital compositing
Mhm.
and trying to make things look photorealistic. If you're lucky enough to get on to like a DreamWorks movie or Pixar film, you might get something to work with, but chances are you're not.
Well, I don't know. Uh, there has always been that feeling about, well, Saturday morning was bad. It's terrible. It's not Disney. But you can, but there was always at least, I don't see where where today's artists go, where these young artists go to find any kind of self fulfillment. Okay, even within a job. I don't know. And I mean, the knowledge is there. I mean, basically, animation is quite simple. It really is simple. If you wanted to, you can save yourself $40,000 and just get a copy, old beat up a copy of the Art of Animation by uh, by Preston Blair, and that's everything
Okay.
that you need.
Yeah, yeah, that's sort of the interesting part about it is that even with the comic books, which is another thing that I got really interested in,
Mhm,
is that when I started to get interested in it, I couldn't get a lot of information about it, at least from the industry side of how much money should you be paid to do stuff. People are very cagey about their page rates because they don't want,
mhm,
their friends to know that they're being paid more than them.
mhm,
But you can tell. I mean, you look at someone like Sean Gordon Murphy, that man is getting like $400 or $500 a page, because if he's not, he's asking for it.
mhm.
Um, and then some of the other folks who are just turning stuff in that has absolutely no value to it. It looks like they didn't care what they did. They're probably getting $50 a page,
Mhm.
right? But the technical aspects of it sometimes is just, it's not that you can't learn it on your own. It's one of those things of you don't know what you don't know, and
Mm,
so having someone like, I would have probably stumbled upon the idea of cushioning scenes, cushioning frames. I probably would have stumbled onto that myself. Eventually, I would have realized, what if I just added another drawing where the hand just sort of settled here,
yeah.
or that body settled and then moved to the next move? I probably would have stumbled upon onto that, but that may have happened 4 or 5 years down the line. Whereas going to school or just watching videos like what you do, what other folks do, where they're talking about the process, they mention that. I'm like, I never thought about that. You're kind of missing that when you have folks who have that knowledge and they don't pass it on. You don't know what you don't know. There are little things they just like, oh, you can just cheat. Like, if you no
Yeah.
one told you about animation and they just said, oh, it's 24 frames a second, you just draw 24 drawings, you'd sit down and draw 24 drawings, and that wouldn't be wrong, but it would probably never occur to you. You could just cut out half of those and the eye literally couldn't tell the difference.
Well, here's the thing. Google is a great machine for finding information. There
Yes.
is nothing when again, there's a difference in technology from today and what it was back in the day. You had to go searching for it back then. I mean, by literally into old magazines, old books. And we would go. There would be like as I said, I my start was in New York City. So therefore, there were a bunch of us in New York that wound up being on Raggedy Ann and Andy. And it was like, myself, Tom Cito, Eric Goldberg, Dan Haskett. Those
You
guys,
worked with Eric Goldberg.
pardon?
You worked with Eric Goldberg. That is awesome.
Yeah, we were both together. We both had our own little group. He was assisting Tisa David for Anne, for Raggedy Ann, and he had some had a little a crew underneath him to follow up his keys and his cleanup, and I had a crew of my own for a bunch of other animators because I actually had the most animation experience amongst the new assistant animators because I had been working with Johnny Gent. So
Oh,
a
cool.
year and a half was enough experience to qualify me as being a pro, at the age of 26. Because back then you didn't have very much feature experience anywhere other than Disney's. So in New York, so I had my own crew. So yeah, we were, we were over in Manhattan, and that's where Richard Williams was doing the classes. He was directing, and so that's where we would learn, and but we would all be sharing notes. The Disney the Richard Williams book, the big
Yeah.
the big one. Well, his is basically Art Babbitt's notes from his lectures at the Richard Williams studio in the early 70s. And
Okay.
they were all handed out, on Raggedy Ann and Andy. And so that's where to say, okay, now here's what you do to, doing easing in and out, acceleration, deacceleration, doing it, favoring some drawings, hitting a pose and then bringing it back. All of those things were on handwritten notes. I still have my copy of them. They're just really, but you could still find them you could find so much of this information online today, whereas you'd be scraping and you'd be sharing third generation Xeroxes, you know, because that's basically what it is. And now you've got people who've cleaned it up and put it online. I mean, it's amazing how much information is free, and it's all gold.
Yeah, I just actually bought a new version or an updated version of Richard Williams' book.
Yeah.
I bought one back when I was in school,
Uh-huh.
and they had added in some new stuff, so I wanted to get the updated version. I
Uh-huh.
just happen to like print copies of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, I know I sound young. I'm 37, so I'm old enough to like the physical thing in front of me.
Hmm.
But I do go online and I look up stuff. You can find model sheets
Hmm.
that were virtually impossible to find now. If you just spend, a couple of hours, eventually you can find what you're looking for.
Right.
I can't promise they'll be high res, but you will be able to find them.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting that we have that much available, but so few people look for it. Um, and it's kind of sad because animation is such an interesting art form, and like comic books, you are not limited in what you can do. The limit is literally your imagination.
Hmm.
And for very little money, you could go anywhere you want.
Hmm.
And we're seeing even from a concept perspective, people limiting themselves, even with the 3D animation. That that technology allows you to do stuff that you wouldn't have even thought to have done. You can have something look like the old maquettes that people would make to just have them for turnaround so that they could figure out what the characters look like. You
Hmm.
can make it look like that,
Hmm.
look like clay. And they're
Hmm.
like, no, no, we want to make sure we have every pore on the character's face. Or you could make it look like they're actual toys, like they did with Toy Story. You
Hmm.
can make it look like that. There's a video game called Kingdom Hearts, where these anime characters basically end up going to different Disney worlds. And you'd think the art styles wouldn't match, but for some reason it just works. But in the more recent games, because of the improvement of the technology, they can actually really go in and make something look slightly different. So when the characters end up in the real world, in the Pirates of the Caribbean world, the boy Sora, his skin texture is changed to make it look like he has real skin.
Hmm.
His eyes are shrunk down just a little bit more, so he has less of the bigger eyes. But
Hmm.
then you see Donald and Goofy in this sort of like realistic, what they would look like if they
Oh
were real.
God,
It is
yeah,
so creepy.
yeah, I know.
Um, but then you go to like an alternate world, and they're like toys in the Toy Story world, and they have that similar kind of look to them.
Mm.
And the technology lets you do this. You have almost no limitations, and everybody's like, make it photorealistic. I
Well,
just don't understand that.
it's well, I will. I mean, this is my observation. Is that North Americans are incredibly literal minded, and if they can't, I mean, they there's an aspect of that's a little bit too imaginative. If it's too imaginative, and I don't mean creepy imaginative, if it is too whimsical, if it becomes childish
Yeah.
in their minds, and you lose a sense of wonder, and if it's not innocent, innocent, uh, and is considered a negative in creativity. You don't have to have, you don't have to have the dark side all the time.
Yeah.
And so there's that aspect, which is kind of like where I just want to maybe spend a couple of minutes about comic books
Okay.
and the, uh, the aspect about how do you get young. I mean, there's not enough material to my way of looking for young new comic book readers because the comic books are just going to die if
They're
if
pretty impenetrable right now. I mean, have you read them for a while, or have you like many people just said I'm done?
well, I've tried reading them, and I just find it just I it's not for me. Okay, that's what I'm saying. For me, comic books are today's comic books are not to my liking. That's all. I mean, if somebody will buy them, then more power to them. But I don't know, other than things like Dog Man and Captain Underpants. I don't know what comic books in term for big publication readership there are. You know.
Well, the Japanese comics are very popular. Manga is very, very popular, and most of my friends who have kids, that's what their kids read.
Yeah.
You really can't give them an American comic. They kind of aren't interested.
What is it?
Um,
What's the difference?
well, the Japanese comics, one of the things that's more common there is that they're more likely to have different genres.
Hmm.
So it's not all most of the American stuff from Marvel and DC, it's all superheroes.
Right.
And then from the indies, a lot of it is geared towards adults with
Yep.
very deep themes that kids just aren't interested in. It's
Right.
not that they can't understand it, they just don't care.
Right.
And then you have like the super kiddie stuff like Captain Underpants and stuff like that. And so once you get past a certain age,
Yeah.
you don't want to read it anymore.
Right.
Japan kind of doesn't do that.
Hmm.
So you take the boys manga or the shonen manga.
Hmm.
Most of this is what we would call battle comics where the characters are fighting each other and it's
Hmm.
about rivalries, it's about friendships, it's about proving yourself. They all seem to have these same themes and it can be very violent, can be very bloody, but the whole point is that it's the character sort of showing their worth, showing their strength,
Hmm.
and they have a variety of leads. Every lead is not always a boy. Every
Hmm.
lead is not always young,
Hmm.
right? Dragon Ball was was at its height of popularity when Goku was a grown man. He had a very childlike way about him, and his innocence towards thinking that people could be reformed and
Hmm.
wanting to win over his enemies. But if it came down to him defending the world, he is flat out going to kill you.
Right.
So it's one of those things of they understand what a younger audience, what draws them in, and keeping it simple. When the manga Naruto became popular here in the States,
Hmm.
it was more popular with teenagers than it was with the actual age group it was written for, which is about 12-year-olds. And the main character was 12. Now, I'm sure you know that you can't get a 16-year-old to go anywhere near anything written for a 12-year-old. They won't touch it.
Nope.
They won't want to look at anything featuring kid characters. I'm not like that. They were all dressing like these characters. It instantly clicked. And then they threw it in. It hit here in like 2005, 2003, 2004, 2005, height of Linkin Park's popularity. People started putting the anime footage together with Linkin Park, and that was it. It was like it was a perfect like synergy for that to work. And a lot of those comics have that. And then they also have comics that are for girls
Hmm.
that have the same thing. And then they have comics that are for adults
Hmm.
that are the same kind of thing. So it's a broader spectrum of material to choose from.
Right.
When you look at the American market, it really isn't. And then it's also where do you buy the books?
Yep.
Because you have to go to a bookstore or a comic book store.
Right.
In
Yep.
Japan, they sell them everywhere. You can go to an airport, they're there. You can go to a convenience store, they're there. In Chicago, I gotta go to comic book stores or like the two Barnes and Nobles that are still open.
Hmm.
That's it.
Well, that's that. I don't know what there is no solution to this right now, and we're not going to come up with one right now. But I do think that in terms of where people can find their own audience, if you think differently than from the from what the mainstream comics, or even from the independent comics, the smaller presses, I think crowdfunding may be the only place you can go to at least express yourself and hopefully find an audience. Because basically, crowdfunding is a place where people are supporting the artist and not just the product.
Yeah. And there have been people who've been very successful, like I said about Sean Gordon Murphy.
Yeah.
He just launched his crowdfunder yesterday. He was fully funded within 90 minutes.
Hmm.
I
That's
mean,
amazing.
it
Yeah.
is just absolutely he's gonna if he hasn't reached 100,000 by now, it's been about 24 hours, I'd be shocked. I mean, it's and they were trying his friends
Yeah.
were trying to talk him out of going to Indiegogo because that's the place where the baddies are, right? The ones with the wrong
Yeah.
politics are there. So they were trying to get him to go to Kickstarter, but apparently one of the people who just got fired from Kickstarter didn't like him personally, and
Mhm.
so he wasn't going to do any business with them. But even that kind of thing affects how the books are made. The
Yeah,
overt politics that come into play in just producing the books
I know.
is just insanity.
It is. Well, I know that. I mean, I had a rough draft, rough sketch crowdfunder. I did both Kickstarter and Indiegogo, and I did it first with Indiegogo. Did fine with that, and then I'm just I'm finishing up. I'm closing down the my Indiegogo in demand on Tuesday, so that'll be the end of this program. But it was good, I mean, it was nothing big, but I was able to get a number of drawings, a couple of people to support it, and I think a good chunk of it was the fact that I offered an original Boba Fett sketch with it, which is good,
Well, the incentives and perks are one of the selling points for that, and it's
Yeah.
something that you don't really get with a regular comic book, where it's like if it reaches a certain goal, then you can add on more things that make that purchase more enjoyable for the person who's getting it. And
Right.
for the most part, when you're buying a book, chances are you're buying it because you really like that creator, not because you're just following some property.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, but I think that if for anybody who wants to express themselves, and they've got to be able, they've got to have their social media up. They've got to have it's about them as much as their work, because people want to support somebody who's trying to do something different, or at least
Yeah.
to them. And so you can't just put it out there. I mean, today an artist has to be everything. You've got to have all kinds of hats wearing, and be under and understand that you just can't sit in the corner and you have to, speak to people, express who you are, show them that you respect them. People if you're going to have readership, or if you're going to have people read your comic book or watch your film or what have you, um, expect just show respect for their appreciation, and just be that way. Be a Peter Samedi, for crying out loud.
Yeah,
Uh,
it really does help. I mean, it's one thing that I've never forgotten is that when I started going to conventions again back in 2014, I met Todd Knock and his wife, and they were very, very kind to me. I told Todd Knock they helped me learn to draw, which is true. I drew his Young Justice artwork. I would like make copies of that. And when I came back a year later, they not only remembered my name, they remembered who I was, they remembered all this information about me that I just kind of casually threw out. That has always stuck with me. The fact that every time I've seen them, they know who I am.
mhm.
That matters to the degree, even if they didn't remember my name, just the fact that oh, it's you, and they know that. That that gets you to wanna interact with this person. It's like, "I like this person,"
Yeah,
and that helps, and it's fine if somebody's a little abrasive or if that's sort of the persona that they put on, but when you're so off-putting that's like, "I don't care if you don't like my work or you don't like my stuff, then don't buy my" like, don't
yeah,
that's just not selling anything, and it starts to branch out to anybody connected to you, and it taints the entire thing.
yeah. Don't take people's appreciation or enthusiasm for an art form. That's basically what it is. But anyway, just some guy. I really appreciated you coming and talking with me this afternoon.
It was
We've
a great
we,
conversation.
yeah, I know that we went past what I promised it would be, and I apologize for
Oh,
taking
that's fine.
you know.
I'm talking to, like, a guy who made most of the stuff that I watched when I was a kid. Why wouldn't I enjoy having a conversation with you?
Okay. Well, great. Thank you very much. If you'll hang on, and
Mhm.
afterwards, we'll touch just close up and just touch with maybe a word or two later on. But
Okay.
anyway, I want to show you. Thanks for all the people who've shown up and watched our video, and for all those who are going to watch it when it's rerun. I appreciate you spending the time with us, and I'll see you next week. Take care. Bye.
Bye, everybody.